Most people believe peace comes after life finally settles down, after the answers arrive and the future behaves itself. Yet, strangely, some of the calmest souls seem to have no more certainty than anyone else. It's almost as if they discovered a quiet place untouched by outcomes, a place that doesn't panic when plans fall apart. If you've ever lain awake feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing on your chest, you already know how exhausting uncertainty can be. This story begins exactly there, not with confidence, but with a tired heart searching for somewhere safe to rest. There was once a man who thought security meant predicting every turn before it appeared. He carried invisible maps in his mind, charting dangers that hadn't happened, rehearsing conversations that never came. And still, despite all that effort, the ground beneath him felt as unstable as ever. Perhaps you felt that too, the quiet fear that if you stopped bracing yourself, everything might fall apart. What he didn't know was that the very thing he was chasing had been walking beside him all along. This isn't a story about controlling life or forcing courage to appear on command. It's about something gentler, almost counterintuitive, the discovery that safety can exist even when nothing is guaranteed. Not a loud transformation, not a dramatic breakthrough, just a quiet shift that changes how the unknown feels. By the end, you may notice your own shoulders soften, as if a burden you forgot you were carrying has been set down. Because sometimes the deepest security doesn't come from knowing the path, but from trusting the one who walks it. He often woke before the alarm, eyes open in the dim blue of early morning, as if his mind had been keeping watch all night. There was that familiar tightness in his chest, the quiet question humming, "What if something goes wrong today?" He would lie there trying to rehearse every possible outcome, like a man checking windows before a storm that hadn't even formed. Oddly enough, the more plans he made, the less certain he felt, as though certainty were a shy animal that fled at sudden movements. And somewhere between one careful thought and the next, fatigue settled in. Not loud, just heavy, like a coat he'd forgotten he was wearing. By breakfast he was already tired, though the day had barely cleared its throat. He stirred his coffee slowly, imagining conversations that might happen, mistakes he might make, doors that could quietly close. A small voice inside insisted that if he could just anticipate everything, fear wouldn't catch him off guard. But the world, as it turned out, had a way of improvising, ignoring the scripts he wrote so carefully in his head. He began to wonder, not for the first time, whether safety was something you could ever truly arrange in advance. People around him seemed to move with an ease he couldn't quite borrow. They laughed, changed plans, shrugged at surprises, while he carried an invisible ledger of what might collapse. Once, after a careless remark from a colleague lingered longer than it should have, he spent hours replaying it, polishing the worry like a stone. If only he could know what was coming, he thought he might finally rest. Yet rest kept slipping away, as if it required something other than answers. One evening, walking home under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and stars, he noticed how tense his shoulders had become. He paused on the sidewalk, inhaled slowly, and tried a small experiment, just one breath without forecasting the next hour. For a fleeting moment, the air felt steady, almost kind, as though it didn't demand predictions to exist. It surprised him how unfamiliar that simple pause felt, like stepping into a quiet room he hadn't known was there. He couldn't hold it long, but the memory of it stayed, faint and curious. Later, sitting by the window, he watched strangers pass beneath the streetlights, each carrying lives he couldn't map or foresee. It struck him that none of them seemed to possess guarantees either, yet they kept walking, hands in pockets, shoulders loose. Maybe, he wondered, security wasn't hiding somewhere in the future at all. Maybe it lived in a place he hadn't thought to look, somewhere closer, quieter, less dramatic. And with that unsettling, almost hopeful thought, the night seemed to lean in, as if preparing to reveal something he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. In the days that followed, that quiet question lingered beside him like an uninvited but gentle companion. He began to notice how often he searched outside himself for signs that everything would be okay. A delayed message, a change of tone, a door closing too softly. Each one felt like a tremor beneath his feet. It dawned on him, slowly, that he had been trying to anchor himself to things that were never meant to hold still. And no wonder he felt adrift. He had been tying his sense of safety to passing clouds. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench worn smooth by years of waiting, he tried something different. Instead of scanning the horizon of his worries, he placed a hand lightly over his chest and felt the rhythm there. The beat was steady, unconcerned with tomorrow, quietly doing its work without asking permission from the future. For a moment he wondered if stability had been inside him all along, patient as an old tree. It was a strange thought, both comforting and unsettling, like realizing the door had never been locked. He remembered how he used to believe peace would arrive only after everything became predictable. But life had shown him, again and again, that predictability was a guest who rarely stayed long. What if peace didn't depend on knowing what came next, but on trusting that he could meet it when it arrived? The idea felt fragile in his hands, like a small bird that might startle and fly away if gripped too tightly. Still, he kept holding it gently, curious about the warmth it left behind. That evening, a minor inconvenience, a canceled plan, nothing dramatic, stirred the usual ripple of unease. He noticed the first flicker of panic, then paused, breathing slowly, as if giving the moment more space to unfold. Nothing miraculous happened, yet the fear didn't grow as it normally would. It simply hovered, unsure of itself. It was as though uncertainty had lost a little of its authority once he stopped arguing with it. He sat there quietly, surprised by how manageable the unknown could feel when not resisted. Walking home, he realized he hadn't solved the future, hadn't secured any guarantees at all, and yet there was a faint steadiness in his steps, a sense that the ground beneath him wasn't shifting quite so wildly. Perhaps true security wasn't about controlling outcomes, but about discovering a place inside that didn't collapse. The thought didn't arrive as a grand revelation, more like a whisper that asked to be tested. And somewhere ahead, just beyond the familiar streets, life was preparing a meeting that would challenge this fragile new understanding. Not long after, life shifted in a way he hadn't rehearsed for, swift and indifferent to his careful preparations. A letter arrived, brief and formal, announcing changes that would rearrange his routines, his plans, even the places he leaned on. He read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might soften its edges or reveal a hidden reassurance. Instead, the room seemed to tilt slightly, familiar objects turning into witnesses of something he couldn't control. That night, sleep stayed just out of reach, like a train he could hear but never catch. Days became heavy with decisions he didn't feel equipped to make. Simple choices, what to keep, where to go, who to tell, pressed against him like questions demanding answers he didn't trust himself to give. He caught his reflection once in a darkened window and barely recognized the tightness around his eyes. It wasn't only fear of change. It was the belief that without certainty, he would come undone. So he kept searching for reassurance, though none arrived in a language he could understand. Conversations grew strained, even with people who meant well. A careless comment from a relative, meant as advice perhaps, lingered in his chest like a bruise. He nodded politely, then later replayed the words, wondering if they confirmed what he secretly feared about himself. Uncertainty didn't just cloud the future, it made him question his own footing in the present. He started avoiding questions altogether, as though silence might shield him from more unknowns. One evening he tried writing everything down, hoping the act would pin his thoughts in place. The page filled quickly with worries, crossed-out plans, half-finished sentences trailing into the margins. After a while he stopped, noticing how his hand had begun to tremble, the pen leaving small dents in the paper. He closed the notebook and pressed his palms flat against the table, breathing as if steadying a rocking boat. For a moment, the stillness beneath his hands felt more trustworthy than any conclusion he could write. Yet even that fragile calm slipped away when the lights went out and the quiet grew louder. He lay awake listening to the ordinary sounds of the building, footsteps, pipes, a distant door closing, each one oddly magnified. It occurred to him that uncertainty had followed him inside, settling beside his bed like a silent visitor. He wondered how anyone could feel safe without knowing what tomorrow intended to take or give, and as the night stretched on, he sensed that somewhere, perhaps not far away, someone understood this kind of fear differently. A few mornings later, he left the apartment earlier than usual, drawn outside by a restlessness he couldn't name. The city was wrapped in a thin, pearly fog that softened edges and erased distances, as if the world itself were undecided. Without thinking much about direction, he followed a narrow path along the park where shapes appeared only when he was almost upon them. Each step felt tentative, like placing his foot onto a question rather than solid ground. It struck him that this was exactly how his thoughts had been moving, forward, but without clarity. At one bend in the path, he He noticed a small wooden signpost, its arrows pointing toward places hidden entirely by mist. The names meant little when he couldn't see the roads they promised, yet the sign stood there confidently anyway. He touched the damp wood, half expecting it to offer guidance, but it remained silent, patient in its uncertainty. For a moment he imagined carrying it with him, as if a map, even an incomplete one, might steady his nerves. Instead, he kept walking, realizing that no marker could guarantee what lay ahead. The fog thickened in places, thinning in others, revealing fragments of benches, trees, and empty pathways. He found himself slowing down, not out of fear exactly, but because rushing felt useless when visibility was so limited. Oddly, when he stopped trying to peer too far ahead, he noticed small details: the texture of gravel, the cool air on his skin. The ground beneath his shoes felt firm, even if the distance remained hidden, and that small certainty was oddly reassuring. It was the first time he sensed that maybe not seeing everything didn't mean he was lost. A sudden sound, a jogger emerging from the mist, startled him, then passed as quickly as it came. He watched the figure disappear again, moving with a confidence that didn't depend on a clear horizon. How did someone walk so easily through what he found so disorienting? The question lingered, not sharp, but curious, like a door cracked open just enough to suggest another way existed. He stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet hum of a world that carried on without perfect visibility. When he finally resumed walking, his steps were still cautious, yet less desperate for answers. The fog no longer felt like an enemy, more like a condition that asked for patience instead of prediction. Somewhere ahead, shapes began to form, not clearly, but enough to suggest that the path did continue. He sensed, without knowing why, that this strange morning was leading him toward someone who moved through uncertainty differently, and with that faint intuition warming his chest, he followed the path deeper into the mist. Not far along the path, he noticed a figure standing quietly beside a bench, as if the fog had shaped itself into a person. An older man, wrapped in a simple coat, watched the mist with the calm attention one might give a familiar story. There was nothing hurried about him, no restless shifting, just a steady presence that felt oddly out of place in such uncertainty. When the man turned and offered a small nod, it carried the warmth of someone who had been expecting no one at all. For reasons he couldn't explain, the tension in his shoulders loosened a fraction. They began walking in the same direction, not formally together, yet no longer strangers either. The older man moved with quiet confidence, neither rushing nor hesitating, as if the hidden path posed no threat. At one point he reached out and lightly touched a tree trunk, smiling the way someone greets an old friend. "Still here," he murmured, almost to himself, before continuing on without needing a reply. The gesture was so simple it felt profound, like a reminder that not everything was shifting at once. Curiosity nudged him to speak, though words felt clumsy in the damp air. "Aren't you worried about getting lost?" he asked, half expecting the question to sound foolish. The man chuckled softly, a sound as unhurried as his steps, and shook his head. "I used to think I needed to see the whole road," he said, "but the ground under my feet has been enough." Something in that answer settled into him, gentle and unsettling at the same time. They walked in silence for a while, the fog thinning just enough to reveal the path a few steps ahead. He noticed how the man seemed guided not by distant visibility, but by an easy awareness of each moment. When a sudden gust stirred the mist, the older man simply paused, breathing slowly as if greeting the uncertainty itself. It wasn't bravado or denial. It was a quiet trust that didn't require guarantees to exist. Watching him, he wondered what it would feel like to carry that kind of steadiness inside. As they reached a fork barely visible through the haze, the man stopped and looked at him with kind, knowing eyes. "Strange, isn't it?" he said gently, "how we search the future for safety when it's been traveling with us all along." The words lingered in the air between them, soft but unmistakable, like a bell heard through fog. Before he could respond, the man turned down one of the paths, moving forward with the same quiet assurance. And he stood there, sensing that this brief encounter had opened a door he didn't yet know how to walk through. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. He hesitated only a moment before following the path the older man had taken, guided less by sight than by a quiet pull of curiosity. The fog seemed thinner there, though not gone, as if it were allowing just enough visibility for trust to grow. Ahead, the man stood still, eyes closed, one hand resting lightly over his chest as though listening to something internal. When he noticed he wasn't alone anymore, he smiled, not surprised, just welcoming, like a host who had left the door open. "Most people try to outrun uncertainty," he said softly, "but it walks at the same pace as we do." He demonstrated by taking a slow breath, shoulders rising and falling with unforced ease. "Feel your feet," he suggested, pressing his shoe gently into the gravel. "The ground doesn't ask what tomorrow will bring." Almost shyly, he did the same, noticing the firmness beneath him, the quiet reliability he had overlooked. The act was so small it felt almost trivial, yet something in his chest loosened, like a knot reconsidering its purpose. For a fleeting second, the future stopped shouting, replaced by the simple fact of standing there alive. The man bent down, picked up a small stone, and placed it in his palm. "Carry this when your thoughts start running ahead," he said, closing his fingers gently around it. "It won't tell you what will happen, but it will remind you what is happening now." The stone was cool, solid, unmistakably present, a contrast to the shifting fears that had ruled his nights. He slipped it into his pocket, unsure why such a modest object felt unexpectedly reassuring. They resumed walking, the mentor occasionally pausing to notice a bird call or the faint outline of a branch emerging from mist. It wasn't distraction, it was attention, a deliberate anchoring to what was real and immediate. He tried it too, focusing on the rhythm of his breath for a few steps, then on the weight of the stone against his leg. Each time his mind leaped forward in alarm, these small anchors pulled him gently back, like a tide returning to shore. Uncertainty hadn't vanished, but it no longer filled the entire sky. At a clearing where the fog lifted just enough to reveal pale sunlight, the man stopped once more. "You don't defeat the unknown," he said quietly. "You stop fighting it and discover you're still standing." The words settled deep, not as instructions, but as something to be tested in the quiet laboratory of his own life. He realized the secret wasn't about predicting the path, but about trusting the one who walked it. And as they stepped forward into the soft light, he sensed this fragile understanding was about to be tried in ways he couldn't yet imagine. In the days that followed, he kept the small stone in his pocket, turning it over with his fingers whenever his thoughts began to sprint ahead. At first, it felt like a child's trick, almost silly, yet the cool surface had a way of interrupting the spiral. When a tense email arrived or a plan shifted without warning, his hand would find the stone before panic could fully bloom. He would pause, breathe once, sometimes twice, as if giving his mind a chance to catch up with the present. Little by little, the space between stimulus and fear began to widen, quiet as dawn. He started testing himself with small uncertainties, the kind he used to avoid entirely. Choosing a different route home, letting a message wait unanswered for an hour, saying, "I'll see," instead of, "I'll make sure." Each time discomfort rose, but it no longer felt like a tidal wave, more like a strong gust that passed if he didn't lean into it. The stone became a quiet witness to these experiments, absorbing the heat of his anxiety without complaint. Somewhere along the way, he noticed he was no longer bracing for impact quite so often. Sleep returned gradually, not perfect, but kinder than before. On restless nights he would sit at the edge of the bed, feet on the floor, feeling the steady support beneath him. He'd hold the stone, breathe slowly, and remind himself that this moment wasn't collapsing, even if tomorrow remained unwritten. It was a modest ritual, almost invisible, yet it softened the sharp edges of the dark. Eventually, exhaustion stopped feeling like a permanent address and more like a place he visited less and less. When criticism came, a sharp remark from someone having a bad day, he felt the familiar sting but not the usual aftershock. He slipped his hand into his pocket, grounding himself before the old habit of replaying the words could take hold. The comment lost its echo, fading into the ordinary noise of human imperfection. To his surprise, he even found a flicker of compassion for the person who had spoken carelessly. It was as if his inner footing had grown steadier, allowing him to remain upright when others stumbled. Walking through the park one morning, he realized the fog no longer unsettled him the way it once had. He could see only a short distance ahead, yet his steps felt calm, almost companionable with the unknown. The path hadn't changed, only the way he moved along it. guided now by something quieter than fear. He wondered, with a cautious kind of hope, whether this fragile trust would hold when the stakes were higher. And as if in answer, life began arranging a moment that would ask exactly that of him. The moment arrived on an ordinary afternoon, disguised as a conversation he couldn't postpone. Someone important to him sat across the table, voice unsteady, revealing news that carried more questions than answers. In the past, he would have rushed to fix, predict, or promise outcomes he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he felt the stone in his pocket, warm now from being carried so often, and let his hand rest there quietly. The familiar urge to panic hovered, then softened, unsure of where to land. He listened, truly listened, without rehearsing responses or scanning for hidden dangers. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but spacious, like a pause that allowed honesty to breathe. When he finally spoke, his words were simple, guided more by care than by certainty. "I don't know how this will unfold," he admitted gently, surprising even himself with the calm in his voice. And somehow, that honesty steadied the room more than any confident prediction could have. Later, walking home beneath a sky the color of unpolished silver, he noticed how differently his body held the day. There was still concern, of course, but it didn't crowd his lungs or tighten his jaw. He paused on the sidewalk, pressing the stone lightly, feeling the present gather around him like a quiet shelter. People passed by with their own invisible storms, yet he sensed how calm could ripple outward in subtle ways. Perhaps composure wasn't something you performed, but something others could feel without knowing why. That evening, a minor problem surfaced. A delayed payment, a broken appliance, the sort of nuisance that once spiraled into dread. He handled it step by step, focusing only on what could be done now, not on the imagined chain of disasters beyond it. Between phone calls, he took slow breaths, feet planted firmly, as if standing on ground that belonged to him again. The uncertainty remained, but it no longer dictated the tone of his thoughts. He even caught himself smiling at the absurdity of how much power he used to grant the unknown. Before sleep, he placed the stone on the bedside table, no longer needing to grip it so tightly. It had become less a shield and more a quiet reminder of something he was beginning to trust within himself. As he turned off the light, he wondered how many others lay awake, fearing what hadn't happened yet. He wished he could pass them this small steadiness, like offering a candle without a speech. And drifting toward sleep, he sensed that the next step in his journey might somehow include them too. Some mornings, as he walked through the park, he found himself thinking about the countless people carrying invisible weight. He would notice a hurried face, a slumped posture, the quiet loneliness that hides in plain sight on crowded paths. It occurred to him that not everyone would stumble upon a mentor in the fog or a stone placed gently in their hand. So he began imagining a simpler offering, something small enough to fit into anyone's ordinary day, a practice so brief it could slip between two anxious thoughts without resistance. He tested it on himself first, standing still beside a tree while the world rushed past in its usual urgency. He placed one hand over his chest, the other lightly touching the stone in his pocket, and took a slow breath in, not forcing calm, just acknowledging the moment as it was, uncertain, unfinished, and still somehow bearable. On the exhale, he whispered a single sentence under his breath, "Right now is enough." The words felt modest, almost shy, yet they settled something restless inside him. Later, when unease returned, as it always did in small, surprising ways, he repeated the tiny ritual. A pause, a breath, a quiet acknowledgement of one stable thing: the chair beneath him, the floor under his feet, the air entering his lungs. He realized stability didn't have to be grand to be real. It only had to be noticed. Even during a difficult conversation, he could anchor himself for a few seconds without anyone else knowing. It was like finding a hidden doorway in a house he thought he knew by heart. He imagined someone watching him might not see anything unusual at all. Just a man pausing briefly, eyes softening, shoulders lowering as if setting down an invisible bag. Yet inside, those few seconds created space where fear had less room to expand. He began to trust that others too could discover this quiet foothold if they were gently invited. Not instructed, not persuaded, simply reminded of something they already carried. One evening, he placed the stone in his palm and wondered who might need this simple steadiness more than he did now. The thought wasn't heavy. It felt like a widening circle, calm, extending beyond the borders of his own life. Perhaps peace grew stronger when shared silently, like warmth spreading from one set of hands to another. He closed his fingers around the stone, sensing that the story unfolding through him wasn't meant to stop with him. And somewhere in that realization, the final meaning of his journey began to gather, patient as the fog before sunrise. On a quiet morning, much like the one when this journey began, he returned to the fog-covered path. The mist curled softly around the trees, no longer ominous, just another way the world kept its secrets. He walked without hurry, hands relaxed, the small stone resting lightly in his pocket like a familiar companion. Uncertainty still surrounded him, unchanged in form, yet something in his chest had learned a new language. It spoke not of control, but of a quiet readiness to meet whatever stepped forward from the haze. At the bend where he had once first seen the mentor, he paused and looked ahead without straining to see. There was a gentle courage in simply standing there, neither retreating nor demanding clarity. He realized peace hadn't come from pushing the unknown away, but from discovering he didn't disappear inside it. The ground beneath him felt steady, not because the path was certain, but because he trusted his own footing now. It was a humble strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself yet changes everything. A jogger passed, then another, each emerging briefly from the fog before fading again. He watched them with a quiet smile, recognizing how everyone walked through some version of this unseen terrain. For the first time, he felt less alone in the uncertainty, as if the shared not knowing connected rather than isolated. He slipped the stone into his palm, not out of necessity, but out of gratitude for what it had taught him. It had never promised safety, only reminded him where to find it. As the sun began to thin the mist, shapes sharpened, colors returning slowly to their places. He knew the fog would return on other days, just as doubts and fears would visit without invitation. But now he carried something quieter than reassurance, steadier than prediction, a trust that he could walk calmly even when the horizon refused to reveal itself. And that trust felt less like armor and more like an open hand. When he finally turned back toward home, his steps were unhurried, almost companionable with the unknown ahead. The path remained partly hidden, yet it no longer demanded answers before allowing him forward. He sensed that courage wasn't loud or dramatic, but quiet enough to be mistaken for ordinary living. Somewhere behind him, the fog closed gently over his footprints, as if keeping the story safe for the next traveler, and he walked on, carrying a peace that didn't depend on knowing where the path would end.